Welcome and thank you for joining us for a virtual tour and discussion with N Hen Farm on starting an organic vegetable and poultry farm. I'm Nikki Kolb, NOFA New Hampshire's Operations Manager. NOFA New Hampshire is the Northeast Organic Farming Association of New Hampshire. We promote organic farming, gardening, and land care practices for healthy communities. This is the 5th of 6 tours in our 2020 CRAFT program. CRAFT stands for Collaborative Regional Alliances for Farmer Training. And the program focuses on peer-to-peer farmer-led education and is supported by Farm Credit Northeast Ag Enhancement. And now I'd like to introduce farmers Steve and Dawn Forde. Welcome. Hi, folks. Hi. Thanks, Steve and Dawn. All right, so let's take a look around N Hen Farm. Bear with me one moment. I'm going to mute myself and turn off my video, and then I'll share my screen so we can all watch the video tour together. You can go off screen and see you in a little bit.
Hi, welcome to N Hen Farm. I'm Dawn, this is Steve Forde. We're the owners. We're a diversified farm in Henniker, New Hampshire. We've been doing this for about 6 years now. We're certified farmers certified organic farmers for our vegetables and our fruits, and we're working toward our certification for our poultry. We raise broiler chickens, laying hens, and Thanksgiving turkeys. We sell our products at the Henniker Community Market, the Concord Farmers Market, and the Colby Hill Inn restaurant. So this is our 6th year of farming at N Hen Farm, and we came to this a little differently than most new farmers. We had been gardening in a suburban garden for 30-something years. We've always tried to do things naturally, to be organic. We were members of NOFA, Massachusetts before we came to New Hampshire. Read Mother Earth News, Organic Gardening Magazine, always believed in eating wholesome and fresh foods. And about 9 years ago, we were trying to envision what we would do in our retirement. And we wanted to come back to New Hampshire, and we thought we'd buy the farm. So we looked and hunted and found this beautiful piece of property. And I thought we were going to be homesteading, just raising vegetables and animals for ourselves, but Stephen's retirement plans were much grander, and now we are a farm. It's been a lot of work, but a lot of fun. When we were back at our suburban home, we had a vegetable garden, and then Steve was a beekeeper, so we had small animals, and then we got bigger animals. We got laying hens. And I consider that our gateway drug. So we started out with 8 laying hens, and we'll show you our very first chicken coop, which is down here, and how we started.
So our topic today is starting an organic poultry and vegetable farm. And as Dawn said, we started 6 years ago. And the spot where we were just a little while ago was actually where we had our first tent that we would have at the end of the driveway to sell our excess vegetables. And now we're standing in front of our chicken coop that we actually brought up from Massachusetts when we moved here. As Dawn said, we started with laying hens. So we're going to go inside in a minute, and you'll see what we have in there. Some fun little critters. But this is really our where we do our brooding for our broilers and turkeys, and it is our winter coop for our hens, our layers in the colder months. I built this when we were down in Massachusetts, and we really like the building. Fits nice here, and so why don't we go inside and see what's in? You can go right in there. So This is our 7th batch of broilers for this season. There's about 80 broiler chicks in here. They're about a week and a half old. And they'll stay in here for another week and a half. Basically when they're 3 weeks old is when we put them out to pasture. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in a little bit. But as you can see, they have a nice, pretty open area, a heat lamp, water. The paper plates are where their lunch was. So they have, of course, devoured that, and they're pretty happy and just contented right now because it's their afternoon siesta. So, as I said, this was our 7th batch. We'll do 8 for the season. Okay, and where we're going to go next is to look at our hens and pullets, so where our layers are during the rest of the summer. And we can walk down that way. So these are our layer hens. We have 2 structures in here. First off, you'll see there's a fence around them. And the fence is really more for their protection, to keep predators out, than to keep them in, because if they really want to, they'll hop the fence. But generally they'll stay right in here. And we move this fence, portable fencing. It is electrified, not right now. But we can move this around as we need to, so that they are getting fresh grass and fresh spots, new bugs, and vegetation to play in. We have 2 structures. The structure over there is a pullet tractor, and those are our younger layer hens. They're not ready to lay yet. They were purchased as chicks in May, and now they're probably, 4 months old. And in another couple months, they'll start laying. So we have 12 in there, and again, we move that tractor around each day or every couple of days within the fence. The adult layers, most of them are anywhere from 2.5 to a year and a half old. We have a couple older ladies in here that we've had almost since we moved here. And they're a blast. I mean, we love the hens. They all have their own personalities and character, and they give us a lot of eggs. So typically in the peak part of the season, the 24 layers that we have as adults, we'll get close to 1.5 to 2 dozen eggs a day. Starting this time of year, they tend to tail off, and they'll give us probably anywhere from half a dozen to a dozen a day. The other things in terms of organic, so for us, it's important that our chickens have access to soil, because the soil is where plants grow, it's where bugs are, it's where all the nourishment that these animals get kind of derives. And they do get 100% organic feed as their feeding supplement. So that's kind of the layer hens. And again, once December or so rolls around, we move them up to that coop that we were just at, and they'll have access to the outdoors from there, but they'll be sheltered in the cold winter months inside. So that's that. And where we'll go next is where we pasture our broilers. So I want to just go back in history just a little bit. Dawn mentioned that we started this endeavor 6 years ago, and in 2015 we raised our first batch of broiler hens, or chickens I should say. So that year we did 100 birds, and we did 3 batches. There were 30 birds in the first batch, and in the second batch, and 40 in the third one. And we thought, wow, that's a lot of chickens. And This year we're on target to raise 8 batches, each one with 80 to 100 birds. We'll probably raise about not quite 700 broilers, and then we have another 25 to 30 turkeys that we're raising. And we might get to see those a little bit later. But yeah, so it's been a pretty steady progression of raising birds over the last few years, and you know, and it's been really a good business for us. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the broilers and what we do with them. So behind me, there's 2 pens, and each pen holds up to 80 birds. And the pen on the right is, those birds are approximately 7 weeks old. So next week, we will process those birds, slaughter them, and package them, and prepare them to sell at markets. Behind, you know, sort of around that pen, hopefully you can see a bunch of rectangles where the pen has been. It's been moved daily, sometimes twice a day toward the very end, so that again, the broilers have access to soil and all the great things that good soil brings. So good plant life, insects, and then of course they get their grain supplements, which is 100% organic. The pen to the left also has 80 birds, and they still have about another 4 weeks to go before we're processing those. And so you can see over here that there's not as many rectangles because they haven't been outside that long. They've basically been outside for just over a week. And the pens, for anybody starting, this to me is like a really great way to get started with raising your own animal proteins. Okay, well, we have made our way over. Our property is 23.5 acres. We've made our way over onto another part, and here are our turkeys this year. So this tractor holds 26 turkeys. We will divide these this week actually, and put half in another tractor. But we do the same process that we do with our broilers in terms of moving them daily. And we have over an acre of area which to pasture the turkeys on. These turkeys are about 7 weeks old right now, and they'll be ready to go the weekend before Thanksgiving. One of the things I wanted to talk about, and I think this is really critical, especially if you're thinking about raising any kind of animal, whether it's poultry or other mammals, is what are you going to do when that animal is ready to be slaughtered? So Dawn and I both think it's really important that you experience that process of the slaughtering and processing of the animal at least once or twice in your time. It really brings home the sacredness of that animal. I mean, we're relying on these animals to provide sustenance for us and for those that purchase them. And going through that process really, it's a little eye-opening. And yes, it can be tedious, but it also is a real great opportunity to just learn and respect the lives of those animals. So we process almost all of our own birds on farm. In past years, we've actually sent our turkeys out to a processor just because they're pretty big, and physically it's hard to handle. Which brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is if you decide that you are not going to process your own birds, it's critical that you figure out your plan for how you're going to have them processed before you actually go and get the birds and you know, have them be ready to be processed and then figure out what to do. So the day you get your birds at the latest should be when you have a plan, if you're going to send them out, that you already have your date lined up. And so we've heard too many stories about other folks who got chickens, they got a pig, they got any kind of animal, raised it up, and then didn't know what to do with it because they weren't going to kill it themselves and they weren't going to process it. So really figure that out ahead of time. That's a key lesson for what you want to do. And there's lots of resources, and Dawn will probably talk about some of those in a little bit, about how you would go about doing it yourself and so forth. So these are all the animals that we have on our farm today, other than the cat that lives indoors. I guess next we're going to go talk about our vegetable operation, and
That way.
take you over there. So, yep. So far we've talked about mostly our poultry, but now we want to talk a little bit about our sort of progression through our vegetable growing, and of course that is a certified organic operation. So the first year I think we had 4 100-foot beds. Each bed was probably about 4 feet wide. And we grew some tomatoes, and it was a pretty dismal year actually that year. We realized how fertile this soil is for things besides vegetables, and in particular for weeds. Weeds really kind of took over that year. So we went to a lot of workshops and learned about weeding, and we learned about weed management. And so the next year we kind of got up to like 1/8 of an acre. Did pretty good, I think. We got a lot of different vegetables going and kind of figured out what things we grew well and what we didn't. And of course that's an ongoing process. We learn a little every year about what we do well and what we don't, and what vegetables do well here. Today we actually grow on about 1/2 an acre, and that includes our high tunnel, which we just put in last year. We do about 30 different vegetables over the course of a season. Generally our season starts in March, where we're getting seedlings going. We do almost all of our own seedlings and transplants. And then usually, so here we're in zone 5A. Our elevation is about 600 feet, and we are able to get things out. Some transplants we can get out as early as the beginning of May, but most of them are sort of mid-May, early June, if they're not in the tunnel. And then our season historically has, at least in the field, has pretty much wrapped up toward the end of September. Cold weather crops we can get through maybe into October, but certainly beginning of November, things are pretty much shut down out there. As I said, the high tunnel that's over here on my right, that is brand new for us. We actually put our first crops in there this spring. So in there we have tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, lots of greens, and our kale. We decided we would try that inside. And we're going to learn how that works for us going into this winter. We believe a lot in organic farming, and organic has come to mean a lot more to us than it did 10 years ago, when I thought anyway organic was, well, you just throw natural fertilizers and compost on your crops. Becoming certified organic really opened our eyes, but has been a worthwhile process for us. We basically do a lot of nutrient management. We pay a lot of attention to our soil health and what's in there. And we're trying to use practices that we think are truly sustainable for growing and ongoing. So I guess that's kind of our farm, but Dawn's going to talk a little bit about a lot of the resources that we've had that have helped us over the years and kind of get from starting at ground zero, where there was nothing here except grass, to what we are today. So
I think it's important to realize you don't have to do this alone to be a new farmer, that there are a lot of resources out there, such as NOFA New Hampshire. We belong to NOFA, Massachusetts, even before we came up to New Hampshire to this farm. And the workshops and lectures and conferences are invaluable. And there are other NOFA chapters throughout New England. The University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension has been great with their workshops and classes, and even now, where we all have to watch Zoom meetings, it's great that I can go to a Zoom class in Littleton and not have to drive. Maybe that's the only benefit of this pandemic. The Small Beginning Farmers in New Hampshire group has been invaluable in that they also provide classes and workshops, and they have equipment that you can borrow and rent if you're a member. We borrow their chicken processing equipment, and there are many of those units located throughout the state. The NRCS, which is part of the U.S. Department of Ag, has been really helpful to us and other farmers, helping us to be better farmers, to help us with high tunnels, help us to learn about saving our soils, the importance of the soils not washing away. So they've been really helpful to us. And networking, just learning from other farmers. I mean, we are not really in competition with our local farmers. We are learning so much from them as part of this craft group. This craft workshop here has showed you. We've learned a lot from Bob at Kearsarge Gore, Denise at Terra Organics, and Henry at Dunn Roving Farm has helped us a lot with our learning about chicken processing and how to be better chicken farmers. So you don't have to do everything alone and learn it all alone. There are great resources out there to help new farmers. So that's my 2 cents.
So one other thing I just want to talk about is very often we hear, oh, it's so expensive or it's so difficult to get certified organic. And I really kind of disagree with that. First off, part of the Farm Bill actually makes it pretty inexpensive to get certified organic. You have to pay the costs up front, but it does, there is a cost share payment back to cover a lot of the certification cost. It's been anywhere from 50 to 75% of that. So for a small farm like us, our certified organic vegetables, our out-of-pocket cost, including our soil testing, is well under $100. So maybe it's 150 tops. And then, you know, the real work in getting certified organic is, of course, paperwork. It's understanding the rules, knowing what you can do, and all of that is actually pretty easy if you just sit down during the winter and kind of go through it, and then find somebody who's already done it. And you know, everybody we've ever talked to has been great about helping us figure out, you know, okay, so what does that mean and what can we do? So anyway, that's my plug on certified organic and doing it. And just, you know, I want to thank you all for taking the time to come visit us at Hop and Hen Farm. You know, our love of farming in part is because we love learning, and farming is if you like to learn, you're going to love farming. And we're still learning, we're still growing, no pun intended, personally and as farmers. Yeah, so we'll talk about questions and everything else, I guess, at the Zoom call.
Right. Thank you. That was really fun to see around the farm and to hear what you all are doing. And I really like that reflection that if you love learning, you're really going to love farming. I think that's great. And I did want to say just one quick thing that Laura is going to share Hop and Hen Farm's Facebook page in the chat box so people can follow you if they're not following you already. Thank you, Laura. And I wanted to give you two an opportunity to share any reflections that you had on the video before we go into questions.
Okay. So there were a few things that I didn't touch on that I feel like I should. So number one is our poultry. We get asked this question a lot. Is, can I buy a chicken in January? And usually the answer is no, because unless we had one left over, we basically do our poultry on a seasonal basis because we want our chickens to have access to the outside and soil. So our season really starts with poultry in April and ends at Thanksgiving. It ends in the end of October for our broilers, and then of course our turkeys go to Thanksgiving. But really after November, pasture is pretty much shut down anyway. There's just not enough daylight and whatnot for animals to, not enough daylight, and the temperatures are cold such that plant growth is basically, plants are dormant. And the insects have all scattered and the worms are down in the ground. And so you're just not gonna get any real value from trying to put your birds out then. So that was one of the things I wanted to touch on. And then the other was, we talked about moving the tractors every day and the benefits for our birds. But actually, it's more involved than that. The benefit is really a regenerative benefit for the soil. That in turn, every year, as we move those pens, our chickens are leaving their manure behind, and that patch where they've been, a couple months later looks really nice and green, lush grass. Even this year when it's been pretty dry. So all of those nutrients from their manure get recycled back into the soil. And it's just, it's constant improvement year to year. The other thing I would mention is we never run our chickens over the same patch of grass more than once in a year. So once one set of broilers has been over a patch of pasture, that piece of pasture is done for the year. We don't put birds back on it again. And in part that just, we want to spread the manure out, but also we, in case, we haven't had this happen, but in case, one batch of birds had some pathogen or, infection with some kind of parasite, it limits where that is and whether other batches of birds could catch that in the same season. So, so I thought it was important to maybe just mention that. And then we didn't, in terms of our organic certification and our fruits and vegetables, we didn't mention, but we should have. So so we bought this property in 2013, and we actually had to go through the 3-year transition period before we could become certified organic. And that 3-year period is basically because we were not in control of anything that was put on in the soil. So there could have been, we were told by the previous owner, but couldn't get that in writing, that nothing had gone on the soil. But so we just opted to say, we'll wait the 3 years, and then we applied for certification and did it that way. So, and the other thing worth mentioning is for anybody thinking, you know, starting out, the other piece that I think is important, and, you know, we learned this too, is getting your soil tested, whether it's through, you know, the cooperative extension labs at UNH or elsewhere, but getting the soil and mineral tests done. When we finally did that, and it took us a few years to do it, you know, we realized our soils were deficient in calcium and highly deficient in potassium. So we were fortunately able to kind of bring those levels up within a couple of years. And so now we've added that testing is, I mean, it's actually required as part of your organic certification, but we do it on a every 2-year basis to test our soils and make sure that we're kind of in that optimal range for minerals, and we get to watch how our organic matter is going up as well. So yeah, those are just some background things I wanted to add. Dawn, I don't know if you had anything else. Okay. So.
Thank you. That's really helpful additional information. And I realized that I know that some people were joining while we were watching the film, and then also even a few people just joined recently. So I just wanted to mention to anyone who's a newcomer to please type in any questions that you have for our farmers, Steve and Dawn, into the chat box, and I'm going to be moderating and reading those questions out to them. But I am going to start with a question of my own first. So I wanted to just touch on something that you also were just sort of mentioning with your vegetables. And so my question is, where are you in the process of becoming certified organic for your eggs and poultry, and, you know, where do you see that going in the future?
Yeah, good. Do you want me to answer that? Sure. So we have, for the last 2 years, been wanting to do this, and to be perfectly candid, you know, I mentioned in the video that there's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of stuff to look at, and so we've been tied up with all the other things on the farm, and so we really haven't gotten to this as quickly as we hoped. But where we are is we've gone through all the paperwork, and we've looked at everything, and we think we have all our sort of documentation squared away, so that come spring we'll file all that with our vegetable certification paperwork. And Nikki, you actually asked about poultry and eggs, and it is one certification process. But, you know, we could choose whether to do just, we certainly will do our broiler chickens and our turkeys. We'll probably end up doing our layers as well, but they're a fairly smaller part of our poultry business. So, you know, it's possible we won't, but.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure.
So I see a bunch of new questions came in. Thank you all. So someone has said that the focus on soil health is so important, and they really appreciate that in this program. Thank you. So they have two questions. How does compost work on your farm? And do you still keep bees?
Oh, good. So compost on our farm. So first off, we do not generate our own compost. As much as we'd like to, it is, it's something we just have not mastered. And the record keeping that goes with that is quite involved. So we generally opt for the following things. We opt for, we purchase compost. Actually, we buy it through the NOFA bulk order sale. And it comes, Coast of Maine as the producer. And so it's relatively local. In other years, we've bought some compost from Ideal Compost, which is in Peterborough, New Hampshire. So, and both of them have good products. So, and we've been, actually this year in particular, since the high tunnel was new for us and we hadn't grown anything on that particular, you know, piece of soil, we decided we wanted to put a lot of compost on those beds to kind of give it a boost. We knew it would probably need some extra nitrogen and organic matter that it wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So we opted for that. And then we do periodically put, you know, purchased compost on other beds in our fields. Yeah.
The bees died. That's the sad part of it.
Oh yeah, right. So the other question was, do we still keep bees? And to be perfectly honest, since I actually kept bees for 20 years or more in Massachusetts, and was reasonably successful overwintering our hives there. But we have yet to overwinter our hives in New Hampshire for reasons unknown, whether it's mites or other, you know, just colder, perhaps a bad location. So we did not have bees this year. I expect we will have bees again next year, but we'll probably look at relocating our hives to a different spot on the farm where perhaps it might have a little more shelter, and see how that goes.
Thank you for both of those answers. Okay, so the next question is, what made you decide to raise chickens?
Well, like I said, hens were the gateway drug. They were just so much fun, and they're so personable, and they're just a lot of, hens are a lot of fun. And we had eaten our old lady stew hens before, so I guess broiler chickens were just the next step.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty natural thing. So the hens we raise are really dual purpose breeds for both eggs and meat.
Right.
Of course, once they're, so you could raise, so we, there's several varieties and we could talk about that if people are interested, but so you could certainly raise them, and, you know, like our pullets, for example, we could decide to slaughter them right now before they've even started laying, and there'd be a fair amount of meat on those birds. But they're not really bred, they're not great for that, and it's for what people are used to buying in the grocery store, not so much from the where it comes from, but just kind of what it looks like. We decided, you know, Cornish cross birds were the right breed, and it was really easy and quick turn, so you don't have a real long investment in the birds while you're raising them to turn them over and you know, get money back for them. So
Is that the answer? Did we answer the question?
Yes, I think so. Thank you. We have a bunch of questions here, which is great. I know we have about 15 minutes for our Q&A period remaining. So the next question is, what are your main strategies for building soil health, including improving calcium and potassium, like you mentioned before?
So the main strategy is, well, first off, it all starts with testing so that you know what
You're missing.
what you need. And so we don't want to invest a lot of money in things that are really, our soil is really good. But we do, so the calcium and potassium in particular, based on our soil tests, we have been using a couple, for potassium, we use a couple products. One is called green sand, and that's a pretty slow release potassium. It looks like it looks like green beach sand. Super fine green beach sand is the best way to describe it. Pretty easy to spread. And that actually also helps with the tilth, soil tilth, the way it feels and how it holds together. I'll talk about a little more about the soil type in a minute. But the other thing we're using for potassium is sulfate of potash. And again, how much we put down is really dependent on what our soil tests are telling us. But we've noticed some real improvements both in the soil tilth and health. Tilth and the mineral content through that method. Let me talk about our soil. So we have I forgot now which the exact soil type from the USDA soil survey, but it is a heavy silty loam is the best way I can describe it. And so it holds water really well, which this year has been, a godsend, to be candid. But in the spring, particularly if we've had a wet winter or spring, it has made it incredibly difficult to get out and work the fields. So adding the green sand, adding more organic matter are the things we're really focused on. So the other thing, the question asked about calcium. So our magnesium levels are really pretty optimal. So we've opted for calcitic lime, which basically has very little magnesium. And so that's what we apply. Although I'm not sure it would, be a huge problem if we use just a regular, dolomite lime. But and then, so the other thing that we've started doing more aggressively is cover cropping, and we invested in a BCS that has a flail mower so that we can kind of get that organic matter back into our beds and get that worked in. So those are the main things. And again, we compost for crops that we think will benefit most from it.
Great, thank you. This is sort of like a zooming out question, but so someone asks, in my Farming with Nature class, we are learning about farming in a changing climate. I was wondering if either of you personally have concerns about the effects of climate change on your farm, and if so, what are they? And also, you mentioned learning from other farmers as a big help. Has this ever come up in discussion? So climate change, changing climate, things like that.
We all worry about the weather and the climate. Since moving to New Hampshire, it seems to me that we've seen a lot of large rain events instead of lots of gentle rainstorms. So we'll go like a month, or last year at least, would go like a month and then have a 4-inch rainstorm, and then go another month and have a 4-inch rainstorm. Are those good? I mean, we're getting rain, but it's so irregular. And then this year we're all in severe drought, and our clay soil looks like dust. So we are concerned about climate change in the future. You know, we need winters for the kinds of trees that grow in the area, for the kinds of fruits we want to grow. We need frost. Those things are all important. That's why we live in New England.
So, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we certainly have those conversations occasionally, you know, with other farmers. It's more of a probably passing conversation than a in-depth, hey, what can we do about that kind of conversation. Although it's certainly at least past winter conferences and other workshops, you know, we're more apt to be able to have some of those discussions. Did that answer? Did we catch all of that?
I think you did. Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you. I'm muting myself, then I have to unmute when
Yeah.
I'm going to ask another question. Okay, so let me see. The next question is also for people who might not know, can you say a little bit about what organic certification requires for poultry production? This was a follow-up to my initial question.
Sure. So a lot of the, what it requires is for poultry, it's all about basically the second day of the bird's life, and then how it's kept, and ultimately if you're selling it as a packaged product, then how it's sold, you know, how it's processed, packaged, and sold. So it covers things from you know, what medications do you use, how you treat them, where they live, you know.
Access to outdoors.
Yep, access to outdoors. How much living space they have, and then, you know, so a lot of it is around, you know, when you process your birds, what are the materials that are used when you process them. Certainly, if you're pasturing outside, like we are, then they have to be on certified organic pasture. So that's a consideration. And I mean, those are the main things that I'm remembering anyway. I'm sure there's things I'm not remembering.
Thank you.
Yep.
So the next question is, and I'm keeping my eye on the clock. So we have about 8 minutes until 8. How did you market your broilers and know that you would be able to sell all that you raised?
Good question.
How do we market? Well, we participate at 2 farmers markets.
No, start at the beginning. So here's the beginning was, we put an ad in the local newspaper.
Oh, that's right.
This was before we were even really doing farmers markets. But that 100 birds we were talking about in the video, we put an ad in there, and we actually got several people that called us and came to the farm and bought chickens. I think at the very end of that year, we got into the Henniker farmers market, and we sold some there. We actually ended up with about 20 chickens, or maybe it was 15, that we had in our freezer that winter.
Which is fine. That's great.
Which was good. I mean, because we've gone years where we didn't keep enough.
For us.
Steve didn't keep enough for Hop and Hen Farm workers. Anyway, so we have, in part, made conscious decisions not to, like, we could certainly raise a lot more birds, or we could try to raise a lot more birds, and we've generally made the conscious decision not to try to you know, go from 500 birds to 1,000 birds, mainly because we don't want to end up having a whole bunch in our freezer. But we have been really successful of late of once people know who you are and is reaching back out to them in the spring and explaining, you know, what your plan is. And we've started, I won't call it a chicken CSA because that's not what we call it, but we do promote, you know, pre-ordering chickens ahead of time, you know, and in each of those 8 batches, you know, taking 1 or 2 or 3 or however many somebody wants to take from each batch. And you know, we encourage them to put some in their freezer so they'll have some for the winter as well. So that's really what we've done. And it did start out with an ad, and yeah, we had a few left over, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't a lot. And then, you know, we've generally erred on the side of let's make sure we don't have a whole bunch. So hopefully that answers the question.
And we have great customers who come back all the time.
Can you plug me? Our battery is running low, so we're gonna get our laptop plugged in. But keep going.
And thank you for those responses. So the next question, this is a couple of questions in one. You mentioned that you move the chickens to fertilize the soil with their manure. Do you then rotate your vegetable crops onto the land? Also, do you use the chickens for any pest control or weed management among your vegetables? And then lastly, I know there are limitations for fresh manure on vegetable beds for food safety. Does this impact your decision on those questions?
I'll answer the last one first, and it is yes. So we do not intermix. As much as I would really like to do that, it's primarily because of the last part, which is, you know, what we could do is at the very end of the season, we could rotate our hens out. We wouldn't even try this with our broilers because they're almost done, and actually moving the pens or the tractors over our raised beds would actually be
Difficult.
pretty difficult. So, but you know, if we moved our hens out, we could probably do that at least at the very end of the season.
There are requirements that you cannot put fresh.
Yeah, they were aware of that.
Okay.
I think they knew that.
I was with the cable.
Thank you. And do you two mind staying just 5 more minutes to
Oh, of
answer
course.
the
No,
few
we're happy to
questions left?
stay on as long as people have
Okay.
questions.
All right, we'll limit it to 5 more minutes, so everyone can feel like they can go to their bedtime. But so the last few, this next one is, how hard was it to first start off raising your own animal protein? Did you have any difficulties with attachment?
Yeah.
So Dawn says yes. For me, I knew this was a business going into it, and that's how I treated it. That said, we have two hens that I mentioned that have been with us from since we moved here, and they're kind of our survivor hens, because when we first moved here, we actually free ranged our hens, and we had, I think we got 8 hens that year. 2 of them survived. The rest were all attacked by predators, either hawks or owls or coyotes, and then one of them even was attacked by a dog, and you know, I managed to find her, and then we kept her. So we nursed her back to health, and so
He's attached.
I'm attached to her, definitely. But the broilers, to be perfectly honest, you won't get attached to them very easily unless you only had like one or two. When you have a bunch, they tend to they peck at you. You're bringing them food, but they'll peck at you, and you know, they can at times be vicious. So, we treat them well. Don't get me wrong, but I wouldn't say we're attached to them.
Thank you. So the next question is, on the business side, are you able to break even or turn a profit? And are your customers all local?
I believe depending on your definition of local, but as Dawn said, we sell at 2 farmers markets, so we assume that the customers that come to those markets are local, and we sell to the Colby Hill Inn, and we do have people that come to our farm and buy them here. So yeah, I think 100% of our customers are probably New Hampshire.
We don't ship to
Yeah,
Mexico or anything.
By the way, our poultry is not USDA inspected. We're exempt from that requirement. But that does mean that we have to sell to end consumers and within state. So that was that part of the question. There was another part, sorry.
Well, the other part was about finances.
Oh yeah, so poultry, this is not counting our labor, Dawn and I's labor, or our labor, but we are profitable on our poultry. I have a hard time figuring this out on our vegetables. I think overall we probably are, but we have a lot of investment in equipment that, where you have to amortize or depreciate over time. And so from a tax perspective, we're near break even. I suspect that on excluding taxes, we're definitely doing okay.
Thank you. All right, we have just one more question here, and then I have one very quick final question. So the last one from our attendees is, what is or was the hardest part of getting your farm organic certified?
Hardest part?
Hardest part, yeah.
I actually think the hardest part was, okay, so for us, it was really making the commitment to sit down and go through the NOAA, the NOP, the National Organic Program regulations, and understanding what those meant, and then translating that onto the to the organic system plan, which actually the New Hampshire Department of Ag pretty much provides for you. So originally we were thinking we were going to have to come up with this plan all from scratch. And it turns out that basically what you're doing is filling out a big form. Now, sometimes that form has a lot of parts to it, but it's really just kind of deciding you're going to do it and then methodically going through it. And that was probably the biggest thing. And realizing when we first looked at it that we probably didn't have all the answers. And so then it's just talking to people at the Department of Ag and figuring out, okay, so how do we move forward?
And good record keeping is part of good farm management anyway.
Yeah.
But so that's a good practice that you should be doing. But there's so many other things that we needed to keep track of for our certification that we didn't realize. So
I think the one part of that thing that always kind of feels like it's a huge chore is, so every year you need to go and look and say, what were your biggest problems on your farm, from a pest or weeds or those things. What actions did you take? And then how effective were they? And so keeping some logs, just writing down notes each week on what you were doing on your farm. That was probably the biggest and most helpful thing. And once we started doing that, it became pretty easy.
Thank you. So my last question, that I know that you mentioned your various markets, but I also know that you do holiday turkeys. So should people or can people place orders with you, and how can they do that?
Well, you could ask to be added to our waiting list. As you know, as we said, we only raise a small number. And at our markets, we do, starting in June, we start promoting turkeys and getting people to sign up and pay deposits. And so, usually, if we're going to have, let's say we're going to have 25 turkeys, we sort of take deposits on 20 or so, and then the rest we just keep a waiting list, because we never know if we're going to have a predator issue, or some turkeys, like humans, some of them, sometimes they have heart attacks. We actually had one that did that right in front of Dawn. Just so it happens. I mean, you just lose a bird to something. But we keep a waiting list, and then so if you're interested, think about 2021 and
Talk to us next June.
talk to us in January.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
So I'm going to just put on one more screen here. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. And yes, so we're at 8:05. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us. And this concludes our tour and discussion with Hop and Hen Farm. And Steve and Dawn, I want to thank you again for a great tour and for answering all of our questions tonight.
Well, glad you could all come.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And if you did like the tour, you can support NOFA New Hampshire by becoming a member or making a donation. And the links to do so are up here on the screen. And please do mark your calendars for our final virtual craft tour of the year, which will be with Stonewall Farm on Thursday, October 15th at 7 p.m. And that tour will focus on soil health. And thank you again, everyone, for spending your evening with us. Good
Thanks.
night.
Good night.
Night.
Mm-hmm.